Welcome to the Alain Elkann interviews, an unprecedented window into the minds of some of the most well-known and respected figures of the last 25 years.
You're 36, you are from Venezuela, right?
That's a long story.
Can you tell me a little bit of the long story?
My dad and my mom met there. They were working there. My dad was a DJ in Caracas. Stayed together, had me.
Your father was a DJ, right?
He was DJing and partying and working as a construction worker. And
Yeah?
Yeah. And my mom was working as a nanny. She was taking care of a woman who was ill. And then after my mom got pregnant, the family moved to New York. My mom moved with her. I moved to Grenada to live with my grandma, mostly to sort of have like a real childhood.
And you were raised there by your grandmother?
Yeah.
And your parents were in New York?
My parents had separated by that point. My mom was in Brooklyn, had remarried.
And what about your father?
From what I understand, he was, because I didn't meet him until I was 27. So it was like we had a big gap after him and my mom broke up. And then I moved to Brooklyn when I was about 8. My mom had remarried. Her husband had several kids who became my brothers once them, and then they had a kid, my brother Alex. And then once my mom passed away, I started staying with a lot of my mom's friends and my stepdad. My stepdad then remarried.
Your mother passed away?
Yeah.
When you were how old?
10.
So you were educated very little by your parents, right? Mostly by your grandmother, then your stepfather, then friends.
Yeah.
So you were unhappy child or happy child?
I was a lot of different things, I think. But eventually I became a very quiet kid, someone who would draw a lot. After my mom died, it really became like the thing that I started to do.
And you thought you wanted to be an artist, or you didn't know?
No, I didn't know. I didn't even know what it was to be an artist.
Right.
There was nobody in my family or my community who was like artists, but I was a kid who everybody would ask to draw things for them. So they would say, hey, I'm putting on a shirt. Can you draw something on my shirt, or can you draw something on my hat? And so I was just sort of the go-to person.
Gifted to draw.
Yeah, in my neighborhood. And
you took drugs and drifted and had bad habits, or you didn't?
I hung around with people who had bad habits, but I didn't.
You didn't?
I didn't start drinking until I was maybe 24, 25.
So you were not influenced by the neighborhood or by the friends?
I was around and my friends did it. I wasn't really interested in that.
And when did you feel or you discovered that you wanted to be an artist?
Well, I always drew. I always was someone who made. I didn't realize that it was a possibility of that there's a world out there that supports people who make things. I knew that there were people who, if you played basketball, you could have a career, or if you rapped, you could have a career. If you made music, you could have a career. But I didn't think, if this kid who was drawing and thinking about what was happening at the MoMA or Met, that those people had a career. That never really dawned on me.
When did you discover art and museums and artists? How come?
So I always went to art schools. So they call them magnet schools.
Where, in Brooklyn?
In New York. In Manhattan.
How old were you?
Teenager. I went to local school in Brooklyn. That was a magnet school. And then I went to art high school in Manhattan. But it's sort of a famous one. There was Robert De Niro went there and a bunch of actors. And it was divided into performance art, music. Yeah, Madonna's daughter went there. It was just a lot of kids who were all creative individuals. So it wasn't really.
And there you discovered your talent?
Well, I was just always drawing. I knew I was talented. It wasn't really about discovering that I was talented. I always knew that I was able to draw, because that was sort of the thing that everybody around me was like, Alvaro could draw. He could do this. He could, so it was sort of the thing that everybody around me sort of celebrated about me.
And then you went to visit museums at the time?
Yeah, the art school, the high school that I went to It was part of the curriculum, so you'd have to go to the MoMA or the
So,
Met.
and what, because now we are in London and we are doing this interview because of you, because of picking about you, Alvaro Barrington, but also because you have organized or curated with the Thaddaeus Ropac Gallery this exhibition called Artists I Steal From, right? And you put together, I don't know how many.
49.
49
But it could
artists.
easily be 600.
Some are more famous, some are less famous, they come from the 50s, others are contemporary today. You did this according to your taste, according to your experience. I mean, when you went to the museums at the beginning, which artists had impressed you, or you felt close, or you felt, oh, I would like to be like this?
Interestingly, Anselm Kiefer is probably one of the first artists that I remember really loving. There's this painting that he has at the Met. I was turning 25, and I thought, man, I wasn't really happy with where I was. I was like a social worker, and I thought maybe I need to figure out what to do in life. So I started traveling. I left New York. I moved to Caracas and did a lot of traveling throughout Venezuela. And then I started hanging out with some artists. And then came back to New York, worked for a little while, and then moved. A friend of mine and I decided we're going to backpack from Argentina up to New York. But after just sort of backpacking, we decided we're going to stay in Argentina. And so we were there for a while, and I started hanging out with artists again.
Argentinian artists?
Yeah.
You were close to, I don't know, to the Benzacar Gallery or to people like Uriburu or Berni, these Argentinian painters, or?
There were more local artists who were doing like local sort of work. But then I would go to like Malva, and then I just thought, man, this is...
No, you said you were how old?
At this point, I was 27.
And now you are?
36.
So all this happens in 9 years, more or less.
Well, I was always studying art in school, but it was at 27 that I decided, okay, let me...
Plunge.
Yeah, let me take this plunge.
And what did you do?
I was still in school. I came back to the States. I was at Hunter College, which has a great art program, and
Lexington Avenue,
yeah.
68, right?
Yeah. And I was really lucky there were professors like Nari Ward and Katie Siegel who headed the art history program. We had Hunter, through one of the lecturers, Drew Beatty, had organized this thing where you'd have visiting artists every week. So we got a chance to sort of listen to a lot of artists. And I remember Carol Dunham, the painter, once said, if you hate an artist, you should understand why. And if you love an artist, you should understand why. And then you should go look at every show, at every gallery. And so my best friend Teresa and Richard and I, we just would go to shows in Chelsea. We go to the
What
Met.
did you hate?
What did I hate? I just remember the people I love. This amazing Chris Wool painting that MoMA had right at the entrance. And then I started making really bad versions of Chris Wool. Then I made really bad versions of Francis Bacon, really bad versions of...
What did you do with the bad versions? You throw
They're
them
all in
away?
the garbage. They're all in the garbage.
You understood that's a bit the philosophy, if I understood, that you have, no? That each artist is sucking from other artists, right?
That, but also, I think, painting is a language. And you can't just land in Germany and expect to know the language. You have to... You learn the language by studying people who are really great at it and really understand what the language is. And
so ultimately, after Kiefer, who do you think was great?
I mean, everybody in that room downstairs is someone that I just sort of approach with as a way to sort of, okay, let me think and let me work through them. And I was lucky, like someone like Nari Ward was my professor, and Nari really helped me sort of think about other artists. Carrie Moyer helped me think through a lot of artists. I mean, there's so many great artists. I think even...
In other words, you need to go to art school, right?
Well, I think you need to go to the museum. Mm-hmm. That's the art school. Like, the art school is two places. And you could meet the people in an institution, like the Slade or or hunter because you're in a class where most people have said, I'm going to go here for this one particular reason. But art school really happens amongst your friends and in the museums and in the galleries. And
So after you made bad copies of Bacon and others, when did you start doing something you thought was good? And what was it?
It was the last painting I made in undergrad because I just made these really bad versions of all these people that I love, Alain Elkann and so on. And then I thought, okay, I've digested so many things. Let me try to throw it into a painting and see what I get. So I made this painting. It was this guy had a hairy arm. And so I squeezed tubes of paint and it began to like slide down the canvas in this really gross way. And it was at that moment that I realized the possibility within paint, that it was like this thing that was mobile and had life and fluidity. And I was like, oh man, painting could be so much more. But that was after like 10 years of just like copying people and being really rigorous and just writing notes.
Now you open, for instance, this show with a painting, with a work of art, which is canvas on canvas and different kind of
yarns and stuff, yeah.
Right. What is it? A portrait?
Yeah.
Of whom?
Of my experience. You know, when I work on a painting for a long time, you know, some paintings happen within 5 minutes, but if a painting like that happens over 2 years.
Because there is a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
It's not just drawing or.
So it usually is a accumulation of my experiences. So there's a quote in there that I got from when I was down in Florida at Robert Rauschenberg's house in Captiva, Florida. And there's a sort of plug that I saw, and I thought, man, that's such a beautiful plug, and I need to use it. So
But you think between Kiefer, Rauschenberg, Basquiat, there is a kind of string, a fil rouge between your work and their work?
Well, I take from all of them. You know, I think in that one painting that I have in there, it's everyone from someone like Aaron Douglas, who is sort of a predecessor to Jacob Lawrence. There's Rashid Johnson. There's I remember some images of Grenada in there. There's Matisse in there. There's Rashid Johnson, Dubuffet.
So ultimately, it's like a composition, right?
Of a lot of people.
Like a symphony, you put together many different memories and things, and then it becomes.
Yeah.
But why did you decide to use canvas and straw instead of painting or drawing? Because this is more like there is the Italian artist Burri who used a lot of canvas in his work. Yeah. Why did you? Or is it just this particular painting or a series and then you do something else, or you did videos also, I think?
No, I do, I do a lot of different types of paintings, but in this particular case, I couldn't really figure out a way to make a portrait. My portrait sort of looked like other people's portraits. And I remember Chris O'Feely once saying how he used the elephant dung in his painting as a way to sort of throw himself off, as a way to sort of resolve, how do I put an elephant dung in a painting that makes you look at the painting and not think, oh, there's an elephant dung in the painting. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I need to throw something in the painting that now I have to resolve, that I have to find reason for it to be in there. And I remembered my auntie sewing and my parents, my grandma sewing. I mean, mostly my auntie, but maybe I could sew as a way to sort of throw me off, as a way to resolve the fact that I didn't know how to make an interesting portrait. And so that's sort of how the sewing began. It was really as a way to.
So let's say your landmark, I don't know, you think of Giacometti makes like this, Fontana has the slash, Morandi makes bottles. And your thing is canvas and sewing, or you just
that's just one
passage.
Of them. Yeah, it's one of them. One of the worst parts of education is that you learn that these artists did this one thing, and then you see their long history, and then you go, how come they didn't tell me about this? You know what I mean? Like you look at, and Or you look at, yeah, and so I hope that history never remembers me as having the yarn, because I think that's a huge disservice that we do to artists. Picasso was smart in that he sort of was able to figure out how to change, but I think if you look at most artists, they're very diverse, especially in their long history.
Now you are rather well known. We have shows in London, in America. Probably your works are worth quite a lot of money now. Is it very difficult to arrive at this stage? I mean, there are lots of artists in the world,
Yeah.
but completely unknown or who have no chance to, I mean, at your age, to be already able, with Julia Peyton-Jones, who's a very famous woman in the world of art, in this very important gallery, to be able to make your own exhibition with your own choices, it's already something, right? Because not only your work, but plus the works that you pick out. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I feel very privileged. I do think...
How did you arrive to that? Was there someone who said, look at this guy, he's good?
There's a lot of people. I think people sort of saw me around for a long time and just saw, there's artists who I bump into and they're like, yeah, I remember you back in 2002 being at this show and. So I think consistency has sort of played a really big part, but I think on the other end, you're right in that there's a lot of, I think if you're lucky, I think artists are people who are within a community who make. And if you're lucky, you are supported in some sort of way financially. But, my intention has always been to go back to New York, make with my friends, and I became really privileged in that there's an interesting moment happening within the market, and also there were a lot of artists who knew me, who knew my work, and they worked with certain dealers, and they said, hey, by the way, there's this young artist, I think you should check him out,
Because we have interviewed in the past artists who are a bit older than you, but somehow became well known, like Urs Fischer, Dan Cohen, Mark Grochan. Some live in California, others live in New York or have studied in Brooklyn. Yeah. You are of a younger generation, right?
Yeah.
Or are these artists part of your interest or not at all?
They are. I mean, I love Mark's work. I remember seeing it at Enter and Crane Gallery, and it was just like, what the heck is he doing?
You mean Mark Grochan?
Mark Grochan, yeah. I mean, just how he was able to fit so much into every line was really brilliant. But I also knew him sort of coming out of California with artists like Jonas Woods. And I always think, in art, you have your community. Like my friend, Teresa Farrell, who I have a collaboration show with opening at Emmeline. We used to go to Teresa, Richard. We used to go to MoMA and just look at one painting for 8 hours and then come back and, go to lunch and, we used to be so we could, those are the people who sort of push me to make better paintings. And I think we're lucky in that.
You seem to be a very much Brooklyn, New York artist, right? But you said I'm for several months in London and I feel it is better for my work. I feel more concentrated in London.
Yeah.
Why? Because the community here is more, something is changing in the world of art.
I think of myself as being from Brooklyn because I grew up there, been there for 30-something years. But, each corner, even it's like a 10-minute bike ride from my house to my studio. But each corner sort of means something to me. It's like, oh, that's a corner that I made out with that girl, or that's a corner that I got into the argument with my ex-girlfriend. Every corner so by the time I come to the studio, just to be present with the painting, I have to sort of unwind from all of the experiences that I had, that I bought, that I'm not bringing into the studio. Because really, when I'm in the studio, it's about being present with the work. It's about being present with the painting.
You are alone in the studio? You're completely alone, no assistants?
No. Sometimes Teresa and I will collaborate together and she'll be there. But really, it's about me being in conversation with that painting.
How long does it take? How many hours you work?
It depends. Sometimes I'm in the studio for 2 weeks by myself without showering. I don't go home. I'm just there. I smell like...
Don't shower?
No, I just stay.
Probably it must be very smelly, right?
I do. Yeah. Nobody comes in, and I'm just there, you know.
You eat?
Yeah, usually, like, I'll eat, I'll run to the... Yeah, a lot of delivery. After, like, the third day, start delivering. You know, deodorant and clean socks is really important after a couple days. But, you know, I don't want to go outside and then something happens, somebody calls me or whatever, and then I'm totally, like, lost in the work, you know. Then whatever was happening...
You cut the phone, you cut the email and everything.
I have, like, a bad phone addiction, but most of my friends don't message or call me. Most people don't call me anymore because they know, like...
Are the social media influencing your work?
I don't really think of myself as this painter who thinks about social media because, to me, there's something really false about social media. And I think there's something much more realer about this conversation, about me being in front of this painting. So, you know, it's like social media is this thing that's happening over there. And if I'm really present with my art, that's not...
You have Instagram?
Yeah. The work is really the thing that's in front of me, you know. It's the thing that's most important.
One at a time?
No, I work on a lot of different...
Is your studio in Brooklyn quite large?
Yeah. But now it's here.
What do you do in London? You have a studio?
Yeah. I'm actually running to get my paintings delivered to the studio today.
And how much do you work in London?
Well, I was here in grad school at the Slade for 2 years, but now that I'm here, we'll see, you know, I'm hoping to sort of be, because I don't know what it means to be, Mayfair doesn't have the same history as like Flatbush or Brooklyn Heights has for me, or Upper East Side. So it's very...
So you have no memories,
Yeah.
and that's good for you to have a fresh mind.
Yeah.
Tell me something, which is your next step? First of all, how would you describe, in a few words, this exhibition where we are today?
Well, it's the education I wish I had. If I was to be honest, I think art schools should say, you know what, let's go down to the Met and look at this painting. Let's go down to the National Gallery and look at Piero. Let's spend half of the week just looking at Piero and understanding what Piero is doing, or understanding what Uccello or Louis Fishman or Ethel Adnan, or, you know, like, what are they doing? Like, why is that a successful painting? You know, what is Kiefer doing? What is Basquiat doing? Why are they here? Why are they in front of me? Is it just some random scheme, or are they actually doing something brilliant? And here's a way to look at what they're actually doing. Because I think for a very long time, there was this space where art was sort of generated to make people feel dumb, you know, or made you feel like either you were naturally gifted and you had it and other people didn't have it. And I think, no, art is accessible. Art is about, you know, like it's boys, we're here. It's something you learn. It's something that's part of our capacity to learn, to look, to see, to be. So I hope it's an exhibition where people go, oh man, Basquiat isn't some big god in the sky. He was just a human being. You know, Kiefer isn't just some big, you know, Baselitz isn't some big monster in the sky. They're just human beings. We could all learn from every one of them.
And what is your next project? You have your own exhibition?
Yeah, so I'm here in London for the next October. We're doing a bunch of parties in this gallery, Emmeline, in Shoreditch. And then we're opening the first of a multi-chapter 10-year project between Sadie Coates and Corey Mora. I'm doing a Notting Hill Carnival float and a party. And then next year, we're opening the second chapter at Corey Mora, and in Paris, we're doing these portrait paintings
With
Ropac
in Paris,
and a massive concert. We're doing like a massive concert about fashion.
When you say parties, what do you mean?
Like parties, like you come in and there's
You mean
music.
party, but what about your work?
Yeah, my work is there. I mean, sometimes with Ropac in Paris, I was gonna text him, but I know he's in Basel. But I want to, you know, I want to do like 3 concerts, but about, you know, Paris and fashion and black people and fashion and yeah, I wanted to do a bunch of concerts, but also the shows are just
All
there.
these concerts come from your father.
Maybe. Maybe. But I grew up in that. I grew up in Brooklyn in the 90s where like Notorious B.I.G. and, I grew up in the center of hip hop in the 90s, the center of maybe the most listened to music in the world.
So music is very important for you
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Part of your work. So your shows are like happenings or like part
You could say that. Yeah, they're like happenings. Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. I mean, art, but that has always happened. I mean, Madonna dated Basquiat before she became Madonna. Andy Warhol is partying with Mick Jagger and Bianca Jagger and Aretha Franklin.
But Basquiat was discovered more or less by René Ricard,
Yeah.
who was a very good friend of his wife, or the woman he was living with, Basquiat. And then
That part I didn't
Madonna,
know.
they were all friends.
But yeah, you're right. They were all in this community together.
And you think the art scene is quite lively in New York at the moment, in Brooklyn? No, because we only listen about auctions and prices and galleries and, and very few artists who are
In that,
worth
yeah.
millions and all that. But how is the art scene? Is there life, is there creativity, or you feel that this went somewhere else?
It's complicated. I do think there are people who've moved. A lot of artists have sort of moved upstate or moved to Detroit because New York, kind of like London, is extremely expensive. Artists can't really afford to make and live. A lot of New York artists are working 2 jobs, and art needs time. You need time to be in your studio. So we're having a very complicated moment where artists, if you're not financially secure, or unless you're living, like my friend Teresa and I, it used to be like 8 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment, in a 3-bedroom apartment, just so we could not have to work, so we could make art. And there isn't a lot of people who's willing to do that. There isn't a lot of 30-year-olds who's like, I'm gonna live in a small apartment just so we could all have a studio. And but I know a lot of young artists who are doing that because they want to be in New York.
You said the black community, and I have seen in Brooklyn, not long time ago, there was a big show of Chicago black artists in the Brooklyn Museum. There was a big show about Black Panthers and all that, and many of the black artists. You see, there is in the world of today, there is still a discrimination, a difference, or nowadays artists are all the same? I mean, do you like the definition of black artist, or you prefer to be just an artist?
Well, I am an artist, but I do think our experiences are important. I think we could only be subjective people to our experiences, and if you're telling your subjective truth, it will, because human beings have always been the same. We've been the same for 1 million years. As long as we've been on this planet, we've always been the same. So Romeo and Juliet, even though it happened 400 or 500 years ago, in Shakespeare's mind, the idea of being 15 and 16 and being passionate and being crazy and over the top and willing to kill yourself is always going to be relevant. Like, that's never going to change. I think the same thing with like what a lot of the rappers were talking about, abuse of power, or, I happen to come in that era where that's what they were talking about. So I think if your abuse of power is going to be something that happened 1,000 years ago, it's something that's going to happen 50,000 years from now, because we're always human beings. So I think as artists, our main job is to sort of tell our stories, because we're always the same, and new generation will always sort of find a way to connect what they're going through to who they are today. When I think of someone like Francis Bacon and his inventiveness, the idea of creating imagining the body of painting of what it means to survive war. And when you look at his figures and the sort of way he's breaking up those figures, being in a culture that survives war, as long as we're human beings, we've always been at war. So as long as we're at war and we're trying to find a normalcy, that's going to be important 5,000 years from now.
So you want to say that there will always be prejudice, racial prejudice?
Well, I'm saying,
Or this is going to change? You think we live in a time of racial prejudice coming back? What's going on? I mean, in America now, everybody's punished for one reason or the other. Does it look like we're going backwards, or?
well, I think there are things that are moving forwards, and I think there are things that are moving backwards. But I think the idea of race is something that has happened. It's a construct that is about 500, 600 years old. Back then you didn't, before racial construct, it was more maybe something along where your family line was, right? If your family was from a privileged rich class, it didn't matter if you were a Moor, but if your family, or if you were Muslim, right? So I think human beings are always sort of shifting ideas of ways to sort of discriminate against each other.
You're not very optimistic about the human beings, right? After all, nothing changes.
I am optimistic. I'm optimistic in that I think life is really beautiful, and I think people who are oppressed will always find a way to remove that oppression. But I do think we are subjective beings, and that we can never escape our human subjectivity. We're always people who are only aware of our own self, and through like empathy and love can learn how to love other people. But that's a trained capacity. But yeah, you have moments of incredible, you have cultures that are at peace, and then some cultures that are at war. I think we're very complicated. I think we're extremely complicated. I think if you're like someone who 2,000 years ago, before Christianity and Muslim became like a sort of big thing, big code, you could be a man having sex with another man, or a woman having sex with another woman, and then that be looked down upon. And then the spread of Christianity take that away from a bunch of people. But I think now you have sort of people who are today learning, are pushing back and able to live more freely in that way. So I think, you always have like ebbs of what we're free to be. Today we have technology, which is sort of becoming like that big sort of oppressive force. But I think the kids will learn how to become free through technology. Right now you have like algorithms spreading fake news and things, telling people how to feel. But I think the kids who are living in that era, who are being formed in this era, will see the flaws within that system, and they will challenge that system and make better art from that system and figure out how to get back to their humanity. They'll see like, oh, these things are feeding me wrong information.
You want to say that whatever happens, whatever is invented, the world doesn't mainly changes, and poetry remains poetry, or whatever.
Yes,
in any way, there will be a necessity of that, and therefore, if they try to kill it too much, people will react and go back. So, after all, the human being is stronger than his own inventions.
Yes.
Okay, my friend. Thank you very much.
Alain Elkann interviews.